back. Today's video, as we get further into the topic of suicide prevention, and clearly the focus for most of the following weeks is going to be on the clinical approach to suicide prevention. What do you do when you have a client right in front of you who's having a mental health emergency? And again, remember, having a mental health emergency simply means you have some reason to believe that they might be potentially dangerous to themselves or others. So the public health approach, on the other hand, is made up of interventions that focus on the population at large, as opposed to the individual clinical approach. And in terms of general health, we're talking about things like clean water and sanitation, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, who made it much more stigmatized and negative for people to drive after drinking, seatbelt usage, which saves many lives, laws against distracted driving, which we're seeing now, but I think we need to see more of, and we need to see a change in public attitude here, similar to what happened with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, to make distracted driving, like texting in particular, to be viewed more negatively by people. Taxation and restrictions on smoking have reduced the amount of smoking. Obviously, the education about the cancer-causing aspect of cigarette tobacco smoking has been important. Childhood vaccinations, which obviously have become more controversial in recent times. And when we talk about suicide prevention, mostly we're talking about means restriction. That refers to the method or means that people use with which to attempt suicide or to kill themselves by suicide. So we're talking about restricting that availability, such as barriers on high places or subway stations, fences around railroad tracks, gun control, medication control, restriction on poisons and pesticides. This is a picture of the top of the Empire State Building. Not a very good picture, kind of blurry. This one's blurry, but at least you can see a little bit better the barrier that was built years ago on top of the Empire State Building, but it was not there from the beginning, and people did kill themselves by jumping off the top of the building, the observation deck. So now you might say, or at least some people would say, what's the point? If you put a barrier on the top of the Empire State Building, they'll just go find another tall building to jump off. But we'll see coming up in a few minutes why there's lots of reasons to not buy that argument. And to jump ahead, when you get down to an individual, individuals who are suicidal don't have a plan B. Okay? I'll come back to that in detail. But when people get suicidal, they seem to fix on one particular method, and then if that particular method is unavailable or doesn't work, they don't have a plan B. They just, I don't know, they just go home and take a shower, whatever. So barriers on high places, and as I mentioned a second ago, suicidal people, at least in their short run, now they may over the subsequent month or two come up with a different method, but in the short run, people don't have a plan B. Now that's illustrated by a study of the Golden Gate Bridge. Here's a nice picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. And this psychologist named Richard Seidman did a study, as you can see, published in 1973, which was a follow-up of 515 people who were stopped from jumping off the bridge by either the maintenance workers or the California State Police, who have a constant presence on the Golden Gate Bridge. Seidman was able to follow up by getting death records for all the subsequent years, and you can see some of them for many years, and they found that up to 26 years later, 94% of these people who had been prevented from jumping, which would have been almost certain death, we'll see that in a minute too, 94% of them were still alive or had died of natural causes. Only 25 had died of suicide. So in other words, 5%, less than 5% of these people who were prevented from jumping off the bridge later went on to kill themselves. So obviously they did not go find another bridge or find another high place or whatever. However, unfortunately, still there's no barrier on the Golden Gate Bridge. It's coming, though. It's coming. Here's a picture of the sidewalk across the Golden Gate Bridge, and the low railing on the left here, that with kind of that the Golden Gate color, that bronze color. On the right is the roadway, and last time I was there, I don't remember that other barrier, kind of a fence barrier between the traffic and the sidewalk. but the railing's only 4 feet high. And here's a picture of someone who stepped over the railing. You can see that pipe thing, which for whatever reason, I don't know, they call the cord. This a guy standing on the cord, and the people up above who look like they're, kind of blasé about the whole thing, but it turns out, and if you look closely, you can see that they're all police officers, and they're attempting to talk him back over, climbing back over. And if I'm not mistaken, I read about that this guy was convinced, and he climbed back over. You could also look up YouTube or a TED Talk by a guy named Kevin Briggs, who was a policeman on the Golden Gate Bridge and talked to many people back, talked them out of jumping and to climb back over the bridge. This is Kevin Hines, and Kevin Hines is one of the most recent people, one of the few people to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge and survive. One of the articles in the that I've asked you to read in this class has a couple quotes from Kevin Hines, who had bipolar disorder and was very depressed, jumped from the bridge. While he was walking back and forth, basically trying to get up his courage, he said that he thought if anybody, he thought he looked very distraught, and he thought surely someone would stop and ask, "What's wrong? Can I help?" But nobody did. And he thinks if they had, that he would have spilled it, and he would have said how bad he felt, how depressed he felt, and how he needed help. But nobody did. And in fact, a tourist asked him to take her picture with her camera, and he did, but she didn't say anything. Now, this is not to say that we can prevent all suicides just by asking people one simple question like, how you doing, or do you need help? But it shows the kind of ambivalence and balance that was going on with Kevin Hines in that situation. He also, when he hit the water, broke some bones in his feet and ankles, but was then held up. Some people survive the jump but drowned. Many people don't survive the jump at all, but some people at least survive the jump but then drowned. But he was held up by a sea lion. It's kind of like a seal that inhabit the waters around the Golden Gate Bridge. And he said God sent the sea lion to hold me up until the police boat came out and saved him. Anyway, that was the article that I asked you to read called Just a Smile and a Hello on the Golden Gate Bridge. There have been over 1,600 people who have died, and as of 8 years ago, 33 known survivors, about 30 a year. An earlier study from 1975, a researcher named Rosen was able to interview 6 people who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. At that time, there was only maybe 10 or 12. And asked them what they felt and what they were thinking about on the way down, which takes about 4 seconds. And all of them said they were thinking how much they wanted to live. It's like, whoa, all of a sudden, I want to live. And I'm going to be talking about that in our next video, or maybe 2 videos from now, about ambivalence, how people, once they act on the side of their mixed feelings toward death, then almost invariably the other side, the side that says, I want to live, gets stronger. And that happens with a lot of people. For example, Ken Baldwin jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived in 1985, and he later said, everything in my life that I thought was unfixable was totally fixable, except for having just jumped. And he said it was incredible how quickly I decided that I wanted to live once I realized everything I was going to lose, which is basically his family. This is no surprise. People don't get that, that the intense feelings are not about losing a job or no longer being able to watch football games on Sunday, but they're about what people suddenly realize are the most important things, which tends to be family. So finally in 2014, a plan for a barrier was approved. A net. This is a drawing of what it'll probably look like. You can see this net. It's going to be gray, actually, not the color of the rest of the Golden Gate. Construction's been delayed. It's very expensive, special kind of steel. And they're now projecting a $200 million cost for this. And it's under construction, and the projected date now is this coming January. So that'll be really good. Really good. Now people could still jump into the net, right? You could jump into that net, but they found similar nets, such as the Bern Terrace, which is a cathedral in Switzerland, that it has a preventive quality. And people see the net, they don't jump at all. Now, also, there have been many interventions of the police on the Golden Gate Bridge, an average of 52 a year lately, higher than that, 70 a year, higher than that recently, in the hundreds. And in 2016, they also put a crisis text line into effect. Now, there's other bridges that we can use as a model for this. The Memorial Bridge in Augusta, Maine, built a barrier. And in the 23 years before the barrier, they had 14 suicides. And in the 22 years after the barrier was built, they've had no suicides, and no suicides on other nearby structures. The Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol, England, went from 8 to 4 a year. And the Bloor Viaduct in Toronto, which had a suicide once every 22 days and had over 400 since 1918, has had 0 since they built a barrier in 2003. And Canadians do it right, as I think they frequently do. They held a contest for architects and designers to come up with a barrier that would be effective but yet attractive. And this was called the Luminous Veil. So the Luminous Veil is, as you can see, it's a network of steel cables that are strong, that are under rigid tension. They're too narrow for someone to squeeze between them, but from a distance you can stand back and look through them. You can see this picture. They've had music concerts on Bloor Avenue by the Luminous Veil, and they also put in a crisis phone line. But the crisis phone line on the Skyway Bridge in St. Petersburg, the bridge was built in 1954. The crisis phone installed in 1999, this is a picture of the bridge, has had mixed results. An average of 2.5 people have been saved every year, people who went up on the bridge and said they were going to jump but called, and the police went out, which doesn't seem like a lot, but 2.5 average is 2.5 lives on average. But it's a little bit ambiguous, because during that time suicides were decreasing in Florida during that time in the early 2000s, and yet the suicides on the bridge increased. So some people, such as the article by Steve Stack, who I know, a sociologist, suggests that there's the prevention hypothesis, right, which says call for help. But there's also the suggestion hypothesis, meaning if you put up a phone and advertise it for suicide prevention, that maybe you would attract people who were interested in killing themselves. It's ambiguous. The George Washington Bridge, which goes between New Jersey and New York, also has been the site of a number of many suicides, including one of Tyler Clementi, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which took place in 2010. But the George Washington Bridge, which is run by the Port Authority, installed some fencing and a barrier, and they're going to put up something nicer, supposedly, as of 2017, but now they have a temporary fence and temporary netting in place. You can see this. It's not very attractive, but it's a good, I think, barrier for suicide. And as hopefully I'm beginning to convince you that if you can stop people from Plan A, jumping from the George Washington Bridge, for instance, then often you will have saved a life. Now, another example of means restriction, which is interesting because it wasn't done for the purpose of suicide prevention, but actually had that effect. And that is, get my notes here, the use of less toxic home heating gas. And this is a famous case study in suicide prevention. Now, here in the United States, we have natural gas, right, pumped into homes and apartments for heating and use in your stove and your oven. And natural gas actually doesn't have any smell, by the way. The smell that our natural gas has been artificially added so that people can tell when there's a gas leak. But in England, prior to the 1960s, they had a different kind of home heating gas, which was pumped into people's homes, and it was called either coke gas or coal gas. Coke and coal. Coke is a form of purified coal. So coke gas or coal gas. And the coke gas was much more toxic than the natural gas we have in the United States. Much more higher carbon monoxide content. And so up until the 1960s, throughout the 20th century, up until the 1960s, the most common method of suicide in England was to stick your head in the oven. And this is how the poet and novelist Sylvia Plath killed herself, sticking her head in the oven. Now, sticking your head in the oven means either that literally, you blow out the pilot light, turn on the gas, and stick your head in the oven, or put towels or cloths around the doors and the windows and let the toxic gas fill up the whole kitchen. But in either way, it's kind of similar to what people do with locking themselves into a garage and letting the carbon monoxide from a car exhaust fill up the garage. Well, they decided, with nothing to do with suicide prevention, in England to switch over from the more toxic coke gas to the more pure natural gas, just because it's a better product in general. It's cleaner, more efficient. And so over the course of the decade of the 60s and early 70s, region by region throughout Great Britain, they switched over from one to the other. And what they found was, after that period of time of about 10 years, was a 1/3 drop in suicides, and almost all were fewer suicides by suffocation. In 1960, there were 2,500 suffocation deaths, suicide deaths in Great Britain. By 1977, there were 8. And there was only a small increase in other methods during this time, which suggests that people stuck their head in the oven, but it didn't work. And instead of immediately going out and finding another method, I don't know, whatever they didn't, in the short run, go out and try to kill themselves using another method. They had no plan B. All right. Slowly over the long term, the suicide rates in England went back up again. I don't think ever to as high as they were before. And these charts will illustrate that. The top one is the percentage of carbon monoxide in domestic heating gas from 1955 to 1975, and it shows a gradual increase because they gradually switched over region by region throughout the country. And then in the lower graph, you can see on the left male and on the right female total suicides, the top dotted line, non-carbon monoxide suicides, the middle line, and especially the bottom line. Look at the bottom line. Suicides by carbon monoxide for both men and women went down dramatically in a curve that is almost identical to the curve of the percentage of carbon monoxide in the top chart. So again, I would argue that this shows that if you can stop a person from obtaining the one method that they have in mind, that in most cases they do not have a plan B. They do not find another way to do it, at least not in the short run. All right. Okay, so that's this video. We're going to have part 2 of the public health approach coming up next, so I'll see you then.